in pursuit of health and wisdom. Sapio with Buck Joffrey.
Welcome, everybody. This is Buck Joffrey with Sapio with Buck Joffrey, and today I am going to do a little solo run here on a topic that, admittedly, I don't know that much about. The bad joke there would have been to say, I don't know shit about, because frankly, that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the gut microbiome. And the reason I don't know very much on this, candidly, is because, first of all, this is really stuff that is not taught in medical school. I do think there's something to this. I don't deny the importance of the microbiome and several of the emerging potential health benefits of manipulating and cultivating a healthy microbiome. But it does also, as we often see in the science world and the medicine world, when we don't know much about it, it also ends up being the space where there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of charlatan stuff, and all that as well. Now, I have done a fair amount of looking at literature, and I have been trying to correlate a lot of the claims that people make, even on, some of the major podcasts out there. And it's just not something that's easy to do. And again, this is not to say this is not a very important topic, because I think we're going to find increasingly that it is. But the bigger issue is I don't know what is real and what's not based on scientific data right now in many cases. So what I'm going to do today is just give you a very basic sort of overview of, the concept of microbiome in general, just so you at least have a working language, just some terminology and things like that. And you can certainly look into it. But again, I would caution you to be careful about, what you just kind of jump into and believe. This is an area, again, in traditional medicine, this is not something we do very much with. This is sort of the space where I know a lot of the functional doctors, are more involved with. And again, I am not taking anything away from anyone. There may be a lot of benefit to this, but let's just talk about some of the basic stuff here. So first of all, what does the microbiome actually refer to? It refers to, when you just say microbiome, it actually refers to all bacteria, viruses, fungi, and other organisms, microorganisms that are on our body, whether that's the skin, the nose, the guts, and all that. And technically, all of these things I said, they're outside your body. And the gut is considered to be outside of your body because it's basically a long tube that's connecting your mouth to your anus that communicates with the outside of the world. And that area is not sterile, and it's technically not sort of the inside of your body, right? So most of the time when you hear microbiome, though, especially in news these days, it's referring to the microorganisms in that tube that makes up, your stomach and your intestines and so on and so forth. And especially it refers to the large intestine, where the largest amount of this flora is. Now, this is, again, a very complex ecosystem there, right? It's like, think of it as like a rainforest of trillions of, bacteria, viruses, fungi, microorganisms. And it really does play a pivotal role. We do know that in maintaining, there's a delicate balance in our ecosystem. And, there is this idea, which I think is reasonable, that, these are bugs that ultimately, and I say bugs, I'm talking about these microorganisms. These microorganisms is essentially sort of evolved with us. And so they are important to us. We are important to them. We're sort of codependent. We've evolved with them, so we rely on them. So what is it that they do? They do a lot of things. From the basics, though, they help with digestion. They help break down dietary components, aiding in digestion, particularly of complex carbohydrates and proteins and fats that we need their help with. They also have a significant influence on metabolic balance and regulation of the metabolism and body weight. There is even suggestion that there is a role of the microbiome beyond just purely physiological realms in the domain of mental health, which is really fascinating as well. You may have heard this emerging research suggesting there's sort of this bidirectional communication between the gut and the brain. That's been called the gut-brain axis. This is something that I would probably like to really dive down with on a guest who may have a lot more information on this. But that is something that I think there's a lot of very interesting information on. You hear about people who are actually getting a lot better in terms of various mood syndromes by altering their microbiome. And then on the alternative side of this, disruptions in the access, meaning basically disruption in that ecosystem, an imbalance in that ecosystem. That is called dysbiosis, by the way, okay? And dysbiosis has been implicated in mood disorders such as depression and anxiety. So anyway, I'm giving you a real overview of these concepts, so I'm not going to talk too much about the different kinds of organisms that are involved here, but I would say suffice it to say that, the healthier the ecosystem, the healthier the microbiome, generally speaking, there's a lot more different kinds of variable organisms, right? Like a really, really broad range of organisms. They do tend to have a lot of overlap. So it's not like you have to have all of them, but having like a really broad set of microorganisms in your gut is really important. So we talked about the idea of dysbiosis. And again, dysbiosis is an imbalance or a disruption in the composition of the microbiome. That can be when there's like damage from, say, like antibiotics. You take antibiotics, you killed a bunch of the wrong kind of bugs, and you've left some of the really more harmful ones. There's a bacteria called C. difficile that it can happen sometimes when people take various antibiotics called clindamycin. That is an example of something that can happen when you alter this balance. And on the other end of that, you can have a situation where you have overgrowth of the flora in general, and that can cause problems as well. It can cause problems with GI distress, even brain fog, right? So anyway, lots of factors can contribute to this, dysbiosis. We talked about antibiotic use, dietary patterns, stress, lifestyle choices, and underlying conditions. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of those conditions that people get when they have dysbiosis. Again, that is the word of the day. You see, altered microbiome. That is dysbiosis. So one would be inflammatory bowel disease. You may have heard of Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis. These are things that can certainly, make those worse, although those tend to be autoimmune disease of complex. Basically, it's a complex disease processes, but this certainly can make it exacerbate the problem. More commonly, I would say irritable bowel syndrome. Now, irritable bowel syndrome, it's kind of something that can come and go. Only people who tend to have it will have it, and then it'll go away and maybe come back. But it can be variable in terms of how debilitating it is. But it's essentially a functional gastrointestinal disorder where you can get a lot of abdominal pain, a lot of bloating, altered bowel habits, gas. Essentially what happens there is that, you can get dysbiosis of the gut microbiome, and that can aggravate that. Although, again, it's sort of interesting because this could happen from, bacterial overgrowth as well. I mean, you can actually have a situation where you end up giving yourself irritable bowel syndrome by taking too many probiotics. So it is a slippery situation. Now, obesity, it's interesting that I brought this up before too, but it's sort of a recurrent theme. It seems to be that dysbiosis has been associated with metabolic syndrome, and that, these imbalances in microbial composition can lead to effectively sort of an increased energy harvest from the diet that could alter metabolism of nutrients and create some low-grade inflammation, all of which can lead to potentially to weight gain vis-a-vis metabolic dysfunction, which we've talked about metabolic disorder a bunch on this show, which is like, one of the biggest problems we have in this country. And, pretty much just about anybody who's overweight has got it and has got this whole constellation of symptoms. If you're curious about metabolic syndrome, go and listen to my entire podcast. It's just on metabolic syndrome. It's really critical stuff. Metabolic syndrome, of course, is on the extreme manifestation of that is type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance. And as you can imagine, altered gut microbiome can lead to metabolic dysfunction. It can certainly contribute to type 2 diabetes as well. And so insulin resistance, chronic inflammation, and various metabolic disturbances that we see with type 2 diabetes. Of interest, actually, this is something I think is kind of a very cool area, because I have seen a fair amount of studies on this kind of thing, but the dysbiosis of gut microbiome has actually been linked to a number of autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, MS, autoimmune diseases of the liver. This is actually not a big surprise to me, because there is an enormous number of immune cells in the gut. I mean, it is just a huge, reservoir for immune cells, as you can imagine. So if you're having an autoimmune disease, it's not a big surprise that they could be linked to something related to your microbiome, stuff that's going on in your gut. So as I talked about before, mental health disorders, again, that is an emerging area, the gut-brain axis. So the next question is, well, do you have a problem with your microbiome? I'm not an internist, and in fact, right now, I don't practice outside of looking to potentially do some one-on-one kind of stuff just for some people who are interested on the coaching side. But what I will say is that I was talking to my friend Alan Viglione, who's my doctor and who's been on the show before, and I was talking to him this morning, and I said, "Hey, Alan, what do you do, for workup on, microbiome if you suspect there's a problem with the microbiome, and what do you know about it?" And the thing is that he too was kind of like this sort of black box. So what do you do? I mean, you might expect that if you have somebody with these irritable bowel symptoms like chronic gastrointestinal complaints, pain, bloating, diarrhea, constipation. It could also be like fatigue, malaise, unexplained weight changes, although unexplained weight changes could be a whole lot of other things too. So these are very ambiguous type of symptoms. So you certainly you can do a stool analysis, you can do a comprehensive stool culture, and that can provide insights into, the composition of the gut microbiome. There are these really, really significant microbiome profiling tests. They're sort of like these next generation gene sequencing and metagenomic analysis that gives you like this huge amount of information on the genetic composition of the gut microbiome. I think if you've got ongoing issues, gastrointestinal issues, it might be worth following up on with a gastrointestinal specialist on that. But that is something that is certainly out there that can really potentially reveal dysbiosis associated patterns. Again, we talked about what's a healthy biome is, microbial diversity, having a ton of different microorganisms. And, if there are some shifts in abundance of specific types of bacteria, the overgrowth or whatever, those types of tests can pick it up. There's also breath tests. I mean, I actually, frankly, have never seen this, but there are hydrogen and methane breath tests that can assess carbohydrate malabsorption from the small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. Again, that's something that you can do as well. This is generally the realm, again, where I think a lot of the functional medicine doctors spend a lot of time in this space. It's not right or wrong from my perspective. It is a different approach. And I think those docs have certainly had success in treating tricky things that allopathic medicine, the type of traditional medicine, has not necessarily found good solutions to. So it might be worth going to somebody for them. What are the typical treatments for dysbiosis? Well, dietary modification, as you can imagine. Fermented foods is a big one, like yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi. I like kimchi. Kimchi's good. Those are some of the things that are actually can promote like getting really good flora in your gut. You can obviously take probiotics, right? You can take live microorganisms, and they can confer health benefits, and they can help restore microbial balance and support gastrointestinal health as well. What's interesting, too, is that you might say that you're taking these probiotics, but aren't they going to get killed in the stomach acids anyway? And yeah, I think a lot of them are, but as it turns out, like the dead bacteria actually have some role as well, just from their, some of the proteins and stuff that they express apparently has benefit to the microbiome as well. So, and then there are also various probiotics that you can take that basically have special casings on them that actually don't open up until you get to the colon. Like there was one that I tried called Seed, which is supposed to be some really fancy schmancy one, What I will tell you, and this is not a thing against seed, but man, oh man, I take it and I feel like it gave me irritable bowel syndrome. So I just stopped taking it altogether. So sometimes you just got to say, well, okay, tried it. Didn't seem to help with anything. So I'm not going to do that. But that's what happened with me. But you could try it. You certainly could. SEED is supposed to be a really good one with a good company that spends a lot of time trying to optimize these things. Now, on the other hand, you may have a situation where like you're trying to like lessen overgrowth, and then in that case, you may have antibiotics. You might go in there and try to kill off some antibiotics and then regrow healthier biome. So that's an interesting thing. And the last thing, which sounds gross, but apparently, I've heard about this for years. I've never seen it. I don't know anybody who's had it, but fecal microbiota transplantation, literally transplanting poop into another person's poop, into another person's colon. So you can transfer this sort of fecal material from a healthy donor to a recipient with dysbiosis, right? And you could do that. You could do that with a colonoscopy. You could do that with an enema. You could even do it with oral capsules. It's true. Kind of gross, but yes, poop-filled capsules. Fecal microbiota transplantation. Let's call it FMT. Okay, it is actually fairly commonly used to treat. I mentioned the C. difficile infection, a really bad infection that can like destroy your intestines and kill you. That's one of the treatments there. So there's also a bunch of research that suggests that FMT can also have potential benefits for a whole host of other disorders. And so stay tuned for that. Okay. Now, I did mention probiotics, but I think a few definitions might be helpful as well, because not everybody really knows what they are, and they're everywhere now. So prebiotics, what are prebiotics? Well, probiotics are the actual bugs themselves, the microorganisms themselves. The prebiotics are non-digestible fibers. So you can find those, typically things that you'll find in fruits and vegetables. And they are often these are carbohydrates, but they are carbohydrates that are not digestible by us. So, like cellulose and things like that. So that's what the non-digestible fiber is. Now, they don't really have nutritional value for us, but they serve as food for bacteria in the gut that are really beneficial to us. So these organisms can digest these carbohydrates and fiber into something called butyrate. And butyrate is a very important short chain fatty acid. And interestingly enough, it's used by colon cells as a source of energy instead of glucose. And if you don't get enough of this can really be kind of not good for your colon. As you can imagine, you're basically not giving it its food source. What's interesting too is that the amount of fiber, that is suggested per day is somewhere, I don't have the exact numbers, but it's like 20 or 30 grams. And in American diets, you get usually getting like 2 or 3 grams on average of fiber. So that's something to try to amp up a little bit, try to be nice to your colon, okay? So that is the concept of prebiotics. So it's not prebiotics and fiber. It's not just so that you don't get constipated. You're actually feeding these important bacteria that are in your colon. So that is something to think about, right? Okay, now we talked about probiotics, we talked about prebiotics. Now, what about postbiotics? Another term that I think is useful to know. So postbiotics are, they're essentially the byproducts or fermentation products of these bacteria in the gut. In other words, these gut, I just mentioned they're using these fibers, they're using these prebiotics, and they're digesting them down and creating other compounds and chemicals that are useful to us. Those compounds are postbiotics, okay? And those postbiotics exert a lot of various activities. They can modulate immune function. They can reduce inflammation. They can improve the gut barrier function. And they can also, obviously just promote metabolic health. What I thought was interesting, actually, was that there is some research that suggests that taking postbiotics may actually offer some benefits similar to probiotics without needing to necessarily consume live microorganisms, which I might try to do because I had a kind of a bad experience with that seed probiotic. But postbiotics have been studied for their potential role in promoting gut health and also mitigating inflammation in various disease conditions as well. On the topic of postbiotics, I thought it would be useful to mention one thing that I kind of kept popping up for me when I saw important postbiotics, and that is this compound. It's produced by the bacteria, from digesting some of the fibers and things like that. But the urolithin A has some research on it. I can't say it's really good research because the best study I found actually was a study that was still sponsored by the people who are involved with the company that produces that makes this stuff called Mitopure. But anyway, there's a study in the JAMA network open that showed that people who took urolithin A, which again, this is technically a postbiotic that you can actually order and you could take it yourself. But it showed that it could significantly improve muscle endurance compared to placebo in over 2 months, and that while those effects diminished over 4 months, they suggested that urolithin might actually play a role in age-related muscle decline. So it's sort of interesting. It probably involves mitochondria because there's another study, Cell Reports Medicine, that found supplementation of urolithin led to a 12% improvement in muscle strength, and that it enhanced exercise performance and mitochondrial function in rodents. Another study showed that there was an increase in mitophagy. Now, what is mitophagy? Mitophagy is basically sort of the body eating away damaged mitochondria, which we need. We need mitochondria, but we want to get rid of the weak ones and make new ones. And in the process of getting rid of those damaged old ones, we're reducing harmful inflammation. That whole situation can positively impact mitochondrial health in skeletal muscle. There has been, some study as it relates again to, we talked about alleviating inflammation, but there is a fair amount of stuff in there about exercise promoting muscle cell repair and energy metabolism. So bottom line is, it does seem like there might be something to this urolithin A supplementation, which you might wish to look into. I don't see a lot of downside with urolithin. And again, for me, supplements are all about, the whole asymmetric element of it. I mean, is there a significant downside? I don't think so. I don't really see anything in the literature to suggest there is. And if there is some benefit, it might be worth looking into. Again, this is a postbiotic. It is a substance that typically is produced by bacteria. I guess the one question I have, and I didn't really see this, is does the urolithin A itself does it survive through the stomach and the stomach acids to get down to where you need it in the first place? So who knows? So that's sort of the microbiome 101. And again, I don't claim to be a microbiome guy, right? This is not like my area, but I think it's important at least to have a working knowledge of it. And hopefully this show gives you that. And if there's various topics that are of particular interest to you that you'd like to see me go down, shoot me an email, buck@sapiopodcast.com. And also, study yourself and look into some of this stuff, especially for those of you who've got some chronic, issues with gastrointestinal distress and that kind of thing. That's it for me this week on Sapio. It's Buck Joffrey signing off.
Thanks for listening to Sapio with Buck Joffrey. A quick reminder that while I am, in fact, a surgeon, nothing I say should be construed as medical advice. Now, make sure to include your physician in any medical decisions you make. And also, if you're enjoying the show, please make sure to show your support with a like, share, or subscribe. Until next time, this is Buck Joffrey for Sapio with Buck Joffrey.